Welcome to the Men Are Forged podcast. This is the place where we help young professional men build for lasting success and a meaningful life. I'm your host, Cartwright Morris. For more information on Men Are Forged, go to menareforged.com. That's menareforged.com. Thanks for listening. Today, my interview is with Mike Ruman. Mike has a very much entrepreneurial spirit. He's somebody who's doing a lot of different things, and we definitely dive into that, some of his businesses, some of his mindsets and approach to that. But also we really dive into manhood, masculinity, success, and fatherhood, because Mike is a dad, but he's also a foster dad. And so he shares some of his interesting stories, but as well as just his revelations of what he's learned about himself, what he's learned about manhood and fatherhood. And so if you're a dad, I think you'll very much enjoy this, but there's a lot of other very fascinating things that me and Mike unpack in our episode today. Therefore, please check out healthydads.com. That's Mike's website. That's healthydads.com. There's some great content for dads and us in general, just how to manage our busy lives, but as well as pour into our families and love people well. So hope you enjoyed the interview. Before we get started, if you're a young professional male looking for guidance and direction in your career and life, please look me up at menareforged.com or calvertandassociates.com and schedule an appointment with me today. Mike, good to have you. This is exciting. I've known you, I guess, for a few months, and I've been, wanting to interview and unpack more of your story and what led you to who you are. So I guess, right off the bat, good to have you. Yeah.
Thanks for being here. Yeah, we've known each other for so long. It's been like since 2021.
Right.
Way back.
Right.
It does feel like these last few years feel like a month is kind of like a year.
It really does. I mean, everything. Yeah. I mean, I felt like last March was 5 or 6 years ago. But anyway, yeah. So my first question, Mike, is who really influenced you, and really think about the person that influenced your, what success looks like, what it meant to be a man, that really kind of shaped you in your early days.
Yeah, no, I love this question because it got me to think about, it's a little bit nostalgic because my oldest son just started tackle football.
Oh, wow.
And
yeah.
The guy for me was one of my football coaches.
Oh, yeah.
And, it got me thinking back then. But so I grew up in Monroe, Michigan, which is it's south of Detroit. It's a blue collar town. My dad worked in a factory. His dad worked in a factory. Like, that's just kind of what you did. Mm-hmm. You went to school. Hopefully, after you graduated, you got into Ford. Like, that was the dream. And my older brother, he kind of followed that path. But I had this coach Eric Redmond, who, and I wasn't like the best football player. Like, I was our starting safety, and I was good. But this coach saw something in me, and he raised the expectations.
Yeah.
He wasn't one of those screamers. Like, we did have some of those screamer coaches, but he was just that Ruman, come on. And even just this look he would give me, he pushed me out of my comfort zone, and he expected more. Mm-hmm. And, I was telling my son, he just started tackle football, but, telling him football, 50% of it is the game, and 50% of it is just life. Like last night, was they had a game last night. He's their starting left guard. He's our backup defensive end, and their starting defensive end wasn't there. And so I was taking him to the game, and he's like, Dad, I'm starting both ways, and then afterwards I'm like, what'd you learn? Cause he had a blast doing it. But I think football is just, and sports in general is just a great, teacher of how much you have in you. And so, yeah, Coach Redmond, he just saw something in me, and he made me want to be better. And I think that's, so I went to college after high school, and I think I'm the first Ruman in our line to go to university. And part of that was him seeing this, hey, we can be better. Yeah. And I know we'll talk about healthydads.com in a little bit, but our tagline is every dad better. Mm-hmm. And I think that part of that came from just that football program and just like better. Like we were always striving for better in our lives. But he was that catalyst for me that really just pushed me over the edge.
That's cool.
In a good way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, something you said, the affirmation part, that he affirmed something in you that you didn't know was there, and then brought that out. I mean, how much do you see that in your own life? And now that you have sons, even, do you feel the need to, that as boys, that we need that safe place to fail? And then therefore, when we do actually have that safe place to learn, then we need affirmation to keep going.
Yeah, I think with my son starting football, I was with a buddy last night whose son plays on the opposite team, and both of us are like, I can't sit down. Like we're both walking the sideline. Yeah. Like we wish we were in there.
Right.
But I want my son, even after the first game, like there was things I'm like, so I took video and I wanted to show him, and I'm like, he's got to have fun. He's got to, let him vent. And part of like parenting I've learned is shutting up, asking good questions, letting them process, and just shutting up and giving them a safe place. So like last night after the game, it was just my son and I driving home. I just asked questions. And so I think, questions are a great way to kind of get your point across without like, oh, hey buddy, if you'd have done this differently, or if you'd have done this, like, man, just, I tell myself like, Mike, just shut up. Like, just let them talk, let them process.
Yeah.
And cause part of that's like, we learn from our failures. And so, letting them fail, but also having a safe place to go.
Yeah.
And to your question too, like my wife and I are foster parents. Oh, yeah. And we learned this lesson pretty early on with foster kids and the therapist.
Yeah.
Because for some reason, like some of our foster kids would just be animals at home, but out in public, they were angels. Huh. And the therapist is like, this is actually a good thing. You guys have given them a safe space where they can kind of be themselves. And that's where they kind of like, they be themselves and they act out. They show those emotions, the stuff they need to work on. Right. But when they're in public, they're kind of in this like turtle shell where they can't be themselves. And they're stressed and they kind of shut down. But yeah, having this home of forgiveness, of grace, and even in my own life, just asking kids for forgiveness, having grace, works both ways. But yeah, having that safe space, because once you earn that trust, then they can, you can start pouring into them more once they know they can trust you.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I mean, raising kids, and I imagine even raising foster kids. I mean, has that spurred you thinking about your own story of what experience shaped you, and how that you connect with them, and really what molded you, what matured you, what also led to immaturity, what led to insecurities popping up. Just curious, your thoughts on that.
Yeah, one of our catalysts for just my life, and it happened during foster care. We had a death threat.
Wow.
We had two teen girls, and the dad of the girls apparently left a note outside of our house. We never saw the note. One of the girls told us like, hey, there was because she ran away. And long story short, when we found her, we're like, man, what happened? And she said, my dad left a note outside the bedroom window saying he's going to kill us and everybody else in the house if we went to the police about what he did. That snapped, because we had babies in the house. We had teen girls. I went to the police and I'm like, hey, like we have a death threat. Like, what do we do? And they laughed at me. They're like, what do you want us to do? I'm like, go get the guy. And they're like, we can't do anything, because we didn't have the note, that we just had like hearsay or whatever. But so I snapped. I started, I didn't sleep. I got sick. I got shingles. I got mono. I got in this bad place to the point where like I was at the gun store looking for a gun to go after this dude.
Yeah. And,
not in a healthy space. And there was a moment where my wife and we had a really small house at the time. And like, I think her parents were visiting. We went to the bathroom, we locked the door, And we just like, I'm crying. I'm just like, I can't do this. And my wife, she kicks my butt in like a really good way. Mm-hmm. She's like, where's your faith? Yeah. Where's our faith? Like, do we really trust God has got our back in this? And I'm like, like, how dare you? But it was one of those moments where I'm like, I'm trusting Mike to handle this, and like, I'm not handling it well. Yeah. And that was a catalyst where it's like, hey, God, like, if something bad's going to happen, like, let it happen. Mm-hmm. It's, I'm in your control. And at the same time, remember that song, like, give me your eyes, give me your hands, give me your feet. Mm. Like that song was pretty popular on the radio. Mm-hmm. I remember praying that song, especially with foster care. Like, man, we were going to go like love on these kids and like rescue kids. Mm-hmm. And so that whole death threat, like I started praying that. I'm like, God, give me your hands, give me your eyes, give me your feet, like intervene in this situation. Yeah. I'll never forget them. So every month you meet with the bio parents and the foster parents for like a monthly meeting. And for some reason I got to this meeting like really early. And before this meeting, like the bio parent, he would throw us under the bus. Oh, the Rumans suck. Like they're terrible. We get to this meeting and it's a pretty big waiting room. And so I go sit on one side. I see this guy come in, or he got there early and he saw me and he went to the opposite side. It's a pretty big, it's almost like a DMV like waiting room. Yeah. I felt God like, Mike, this is what you asked for. Like I'm intervening. And I'm like, no way. I am not going over there to talk to him. And God's like, yes, you are. And I still don't remember my feet like walking, but I remember walking across the room. Yeah. And then he saw me and he was kind of like a little bit like, what's he doing? Mm-hmm. I came and sat down next to him and I'm like, hey, and I won't say his name, but like, hey man, I just want to let you know that we're rooting for you. Like we want you to get healthy. Want you to get your girls back. We're just taking care of them while you're getting better, going through your treatment plan. And he just like, he lost it. I was like, how's life? He's like, man, I just got diagnosed with skin cancer. He's like, things aren't going well. Wow. And it just like that was God who came through there. Mm-hmm. And then even after that, we went into the room to have the meeting and it's like, hey, how are things going? It was like, everything's good. Yeah. Like with him. And I'm like, man, like, God came through. But the biggest lesson was like, don't go buy a gun. Ask God to intervene and like trust. Yeah. And I think that happened 10 years ago. Wow. And even then, like, every time I try and like do this on my own, it's like, I'm holding on and it's like, man, let go. Like let God take this, which is hard, being men, like, yeah. I think we want to be in control, do all this. But we have to let go.
Yeah. That's interesting. Cause I mean, what you hit on is, this guy had a huge pain point and his pain was coming out by being angry and sending death threats and basically putting off on everybody else. The reason why I feel bad is because of you. And yeah. And so I don't know, it just got me thinking, and really, yeah, in a similar way, that was the way you were trying to take back control of the situation that created in you. So has that helped you, I guess, throughout your life, really address fear as it's come and kind of revert back to that point in faith and address some of those things that pop up? Today's episode is brought to you by Thrive Marriage Lab. If you want your marriage to thrive, this is a great opportunity to you, because strong marriages are the bedrock of strong churches, organization, families, and community. This is a 12-month pathway for any of you that are looking to really have weekly engagement with experienced marriage counselors. Not just one, but many. So go to restory.life/thrive to get on the waiting list for this great program that starts in April. That's restory.life/thrive. And make sure you put the word Forge in the promo code to receive a discount on your monthly fee. Now, back to the episode.
Yeah. So I always ask like, what is the truth? Because even like in that situation, we met that dad's family. And And when you see their history and realize like it was this family tree of abuse, like God broke my heart. It's like, man, like I can't imagine what that guy went through growing up.
Yeah.
And so you have to ask, like, what's the truth? You know, even like right now I have 2 different businesses and it gets stressful. And sometimes I have to like pause, zoom out, like, what's the truth? Like nothing's on fire. You know, we're not going bankrupt tomorrow. Even if we did, like, we'd be okay. Like my therapist has me do like worst case scenario. Like, what's the worst thing that could happen? Like, you know, if this goes wrong, you start writing it out and you're like, we'd be okay. Like, we'd probably live in the basement of one of our parents, but like, we'll be fine. And so really when I'm afraid of something, it's usually the unknown. And so just, you know, what's the facts in here? What's the truth? And then, that helps. And then verbalizing it too.
Yeah.
So I love to write down like, what's the worst that could happen? And then for some reason, reading it out loud or even like telling somebody, you're like, when I hear myself say that, or I hear myself tell someone else that, it's like, it's not that bad. Like, you know, worst case scenario, like we'll be okay. You know? So it's just what's the source of that fear? What's the truth? And that usually helps.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's interesting that what fear does, it does distort reality. It distorts our perspective. When really, if we really looked at it with light, it's like, oh, that's not that big a deal. That, you know, that Rottweiler is really a Chihuahua, right? You know? Yeah. So, Well,
even like I keep going back to my son's football, but because there's so many good lessons. But you know, he just started playing tackle, and like the first day of pads, like I was scared for him. I'm like, oh my gosh, like he's gonna get paralyzed, or like, you know, all this stuff. And he was a little bit afraid too. But like once you get hit, you're like, that wasn't that bad.
Yeah.
Like, you're like, okay, that wasn't that bad, but it's that like that fear of getting that initial hit. And then, you know, learning from that, like even like this morning, he woke up with like bruises on his arm and he's like, yeah, it's sore, but it's almost like that proud scar. Like, oh yeah, I'm a football player. I got like scars to like prove it now. But yeah, just that's good.
Yeah, that's good. That's cool. So yeah, I mean, jumping back into your story, Mike, what was life like in your 20s? What was some of the things that really shaped you, you know, as a young man trying to figure out work, trying to figure out relationships? Yeah. What were some of the big turning points really?
So I got really lucky and out of college, I went to Michigan State and I worked for a CPA firm. And then my wife and I got married, moved over to West Michigan, and I got really lucky and landed a job at Zondervan Publishers. You know, that's the Rick Warren, it's the NIV, you know, so I was surrounded by believers, you know, cause especially like, you know, fresh out of college, you're very, I was very lost, you know, it's like you grew up in the church, college kind of steers you away. And it's like, you're very influenced. Yeah. And being at Zondervan, like, I mean, we had Stephen Curtis Chapman come in, just like playing songs at lunch. Like you know, there's books, you know, tables full of like Bibles and amazing books. But there was a guy there, Kevin Miles, who got turned on to John Eldridge and started almost like a Wild at Heart's West Michigan chapter. And I got hooked into that, like the whole, you know, Wild at Heart with, you know, beauty to rescue, a battle to fight, especially, you know, as a 25-year-old, you're like, man, like we're at war. Lord of the Rings was, you know, coming out, like just this, you're seeing these stories and you're like, man, like spiritual warfare. Like, so I got plugged in with Kevin and his groups, and he would do these retreats. I think, you know, Kevin, what I loved about Kevin is he was the leader, but he's also journeying through this together. Right. And so for me, like Wild at Heart was pivotal in my 20s. Just, you know, what is a man? What a man is not, what does success look like? What does health look like? And it was to the point where I was on one of these Wild at Heart retreats in West Michigan. And it was like, you know, we're listening to the voice of God. And for some reason it was like Colorado came across. There's a few more like steps to this, but like now we live in Colorado Springs. John Eldridge lives like the neighborhood away from me. Like I run into him on the trail with his dogs. His office is right down the street from us. I got to work with him and Stacy on her book. But I think, his whole message, and he's still preaching that today. Like, heart is good. Like, I think sometimes we beat ourselves up and it's like, oh, we're just a sinner. And it's like, no, you're not. You're a child of the King. Yeah. And when you can embrace that, I think, the 20s is, for me, was just a discovery, like which it's almost like you're at this track and there's all these different roads you could go down. You're like, okay, what does success look like? You're like, man, that guy is kind of a mess, but like they make a lot of money. Right. Is that success? Like this guy has no money, but like he's happy, I think. And so I think that the Wild at Heart, I went to the boot camps, like John's boot camps, the advanced boot camps, and just really like learned a ton of just who you are, got connected to God. And then, foster care really helped like accelerate that because you have to grow up pretty quickly. When you're like 29 and like you have a daughter going to the prom and you got to like have those conversations, you're like, man, I was just in that spot a few years ago. But that for me, that was a huge influence just on who I am. And, even today, just, he has a daily prayer you pray through, like it's still getting poured into.
I this morning heard an interview he did. And one of the things that really stuck out that he's talking about was like the mindset of men that we are all unfinished. Like we're all working towards wholeness, wholeheartedness, but yet we as men, we reject the idea that we're incomplete because like that means we haven't arrived. That means we're not a man. That means we have weakness, right? And and so I just really thought it was fascinating. He used that term. Never heard that term, but it made so much sense of like when I approach the mindset that I'm unfinished, therefore when I experience a trial, a hardship or something that I'm like, oh, this is the testing. This is the growing where God's putting his finger on something saying, hey, you need to grow in this. You need to become more of a man in this. And it's like, but as men, we reject that because then if we embrace that, that means we're recognizing, hey, we're not as manly or as successful or as whatever. Can you think of an instance? I mean, I guess you mentioned foster care as 29. Well, that's interesting. Just an instance where you felt where you really had to, really embrace that mindset of like, okay, God's really putting his finger on something and I have to grow or I'll just stay the same. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think, I'm 43 now. And one thing I'm learning is nobody has this thing figured out. Yeah. Nobody has this thing called life figured out.
Much as they pretend, they don't.
Yeah. And it's all about the better. Like, man, I want to be a better dad today than I was yesterday. And then, tomorrow have a better company today than I did yesterday. And, there's a quote I love, especially with, like with social media and all these influencers, when you start like knowing them or learning about them, this quote is, people are selling the dream, but living the nightmare.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Never heard that one. Wow.
Yeah. So much of this, what you see online, and I spent 10 years in Christian publishing and, things are always what they seem to be. I think you see that now with like pastors getting taken out. You're like, man, like this pastor's got it all figured out. Like the guy from New York, like amazing church, like growing, like speaking, book deals, and like, boom, it's gone. Like he got taken out. And so realizing like nobody has this figured out. But the whole idea of like we're works and processes and every day better. Mm-hmm. As far as instances, I think this ties into it. But when I was 39, I was looking for, this is kind of the birth of healthydads.com. Cause I didn't start out with like, I'm gonna build healthydads.com. Yeah. I was at the local YMCA and I was running on a track above the gymnasium. There's like a runner's track up there. And the kids area was in the gym below. And I remember running and seeing my 4 kids. They were, I don't know, 7, 5, 5, and 5, I think at the time, like a little bit younger. I remember running around and doing laps and just seeing them down there playing. And I had this epiphany. Like, I was the heaviest I've ever been. I was like stressed out. I was trying to run my business. My wife worked full time. So I had like 4 kids at home, running my business, and was drinking too much, eating too much, and just was not in a healthy spot. And I'm like, my kids don't deserve this version of me.
Wow.
And I like to go big. And so I'm like, I want to get healthy.
Yeah.
And so I used to be really involved with MMA, mixed martial arts. I used to have a podcast and cover shows. I had this idea while I was running. I'm like, I'm 39. Like, what if I trained and fought? Like, got in the ring. Like, one, I know I'd get in shape. Yeah. 2, I've always wanted to fight. Like, I've never been in a fight in my life. Like, I played football in high school, rugby in college, but I've never been in like a fist fight. And I'm like, this would be a good like challenge. So I text my old gym trainer. I'm like, hey, I have a big idea.
Yeah.
And his name's Eric Lalone. I love him to death. He called me right away. He's like, what is it? I was like, Eric, you know my situation. I got 4 kids at home. I'm running my business. I'm like, could you train me to fight and get like a sanctioned fight in 90 days? And he's like, I don't know. I think so. Yada, yada. He's like, let's do it. I'm like, this can't take away from my family time. So we mapped out like a training schedule. I started training for this fight. Again, like what I mentioned before, like I didn't tell anybody, but like Eric and I knew about it. But then I remember telling my men's group, I'm like, hey guys, I'm gonna get in a fight. They're like, what? I'm like, I'm gonna sign up and I'm gonna fight some guy. They're like, who? I'm like, I don't know, just some guy. And once I made it public, I'm like, man, I can't back out now. I told these guys I'm gonna fight, and so I started this like fight journey. And in that first 30 days of like training, like I lost 18 pounds, which was like awesome. But like I also like I slept better. I had a shorter temper. I was more productive at work. Like everything leveled up when I got healthy physically.
Yeah.
And even like, friends are like, man, what happened? I'm like, well, I got this fight coming up, and, I've been watching what I eat and, slowing down the drinking. And, but I realized like, hey, this is bigger than just like Mike getting in shape. Like this is about holistic health. And so like the fight journey was called Couch to Fight. It was the whole idea of like dad on a couch gets in the ring. And that turned into healthydads.com. And I'm like, man, I have something bigger. Like this is bigger than just like, hey, let's drink, green smoothies and, do Peloton. Like this is like, man, this is like everything got better. Like my relationship with God got better when I got healthy physically. And so, that started the healthydads.com process. And now today, like we deal with like your physical health, but really like kind of coming around a dad and looking at like holistically, like finances is one of our areas. Like, it's not about making more. It's about like having like a healthy balance. And so, that's kind of the birth of that came from that.
Yeah. Wow. That's so cool.
Yeah. Spoiler. I lost my fight. Like I went the distance though. I didn't get knocked out. Like I remember like going into round 3, I'm like, all right, just don't get knocked out. Like remember this journey. But I lost a decision there.
And that was an MMA fight. So you were working on your ground game, you were working on boxing. I mean, was that like, that's not just like, that's what I think most people miss. MMA is like, you got to work on all these different disciplines. You can't just like be standing up and working on boxing. I mean, it's anyway.
So that's the crazy part about it. It started out as an MMA journey. And then like 2 weeks in, I had to have surgery.
Oh,
and the doctor had to cut 2 things out of my like stomach. So my dad has melanoma cancer. And so like we've had to get tested, and they found some like unusual spots. They have to like, cut them out. So I asked the surgeon, I'm like, hey, I'm training for this fight. Like, I have these 2 big incisions on my stomach. Yeah. I'm like, can I still do this? And he's like, no. He's like, if you open those up, he's like, Mike, there's nothing to like sew. He's like, you'll have like a, 12-inch incision if those open up. I'm like, crap. I'm like, what about Muay Thai or kickboxing? He's like, I I can't tell you yes. He's like, the risk is a lot less if you do that.
Mm-hmm.
And so, 2 weeks into this, it went from an MMA fight to a kickboxing fight. So I ended up doing a Muay Thai, which I didn't mind. Cause like, man, I hate getting choked out.
Yeah.
And just like that ground game, like when someone chokes you out, it's like, I just hate it. So like, I like the stand up part of it. So it was a pivot in my fight journey, but I like doing the stand up better than having your arm almost get broke. What's that?
Do you still fight or still train in similar discipline?
No, my wife, like she's like, I'll give you one. She's like, I'll let you fight once. My trainer's like, you got to fight twice. Cause the first one, you're going to learn so much, which I did. I overthought way too much. Like, yeah. But my wife's like, you're one and done. Like, cause I'm a bleeder. And so every time I come back from training, like I would just have blood everywhere. I think she got tired of like, Yeah,
I can imagine a wife just seeing that her brain who can probably take it a million miles and not really see the reality of it. I just bleed too much, but you hit on something. Yeah, I mean the whole. I mean, you talked about football. You're talking about M&A, and the and I see it more, especially young men, and not every guy needs to be in something athletic. But there should be, so my question, do you think most men, and maybe what you're addressing with some of these dads is like, do we need a physical outlet? Do we need something that, and maybe it's like addressing our anger, or it's just getting us fully, when you address the physical kind of starts dominoes addressing more, beyond that. But yeah. So what would you say with a lot of these dads? What are you addressing when it comes to like physical activity?
So everybody's on a different journey.
Mm-hmm.
And for you, it might be something totally different.
Right.
But I do think you have to have some bigger goal.
Yeah.
So like right now, my wife and we're training for a half marathon. Never run a half marathon. Like commit to something bigger than yourself.
Yeah.
So for some guys, it might be a 5K.
Mm-hmm.
Or it might be, we have a half K here in Colorado Springs. Like they do a half K, but committing to something just really outside your comfort zone. Maybe it's like, hey, starting that side business, or restoring a car, or learning to hunt. Like, what is something that you've dreamed of doing? You saw someone else do online. So like Will Smith has that saying that he has that really good talk about skydiving.
Yeah.
And he says like the best things in life are on the other side of fear.
Yeah.
But for me, like what scares you? Like physical confrontation scared me. Like growing up, like I'm like, dang it, I'm going to tackle this. I'm going to go fight. And you realize like you get hit, like you're okay. Like I didn't die. Like I got bloody, but I didn't die.
Yeah.
But like for guys, it might be moving. There's like for me, a change of scenery is huge. But for some guys, it might be like, hey, you're still in your same hometown, around your same buddies, and you're going nowhere. And the whole idea of you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Like maybe your high school buddies aren't good influences. Like move.
Right.
I'm working with a guy who's moving to like India. I'm like, why? He's like, I don't know. Like change the scenery. But I think committing to something bigger than yourself. Starting a YouTube channel, starting a blog. Like what is something you've always wanted to do? Kind of like your bucket list. Like what's on your bucket list that you can like knock out there? What's something that scares you?
Mm-hmm.
Why does it scare you? Like, can you tackle that fear?
Yeah.
And really challenge it. That's with healthy dads. Like I've built it in a way where we're challenging dads to kind of step outside of their comfort zones to be better without like giving them more anxiety. So having this community of like, hey, let's push through. Like for you, having a podcast, like my guess is you probably had I could do that. And then I can meet cool people and like start this business. And like, you went from like idea to like doing it. I'm sure it's morphed over time. And you probably had some cool wins, some cool fails, but like learned. And it's like, cool. The Men Are Forged podcast, like episode 30 is better than episode 1 was. And, but you wouldn't have got there without doing episode 1.
Right. Yeah. That's so true. Yeah. It's just, and sometimes it's like getting past that first threshold, but most of us feel that intimidation of making that choice. And that's what's so interesting about you is like I guess the bigger go home mindset of like, how do I push through that? Yeah. And where do you think that came from? That mindset of like, all right, because I'm in this position, then I got to go big. And most men maybe don't think that way, but what gets us over the threshold? What needs to change in our mind, how we think to make that decision?
I think just taking it public, like telling people about it.
Like, with my accountability.
Fight,
that's good.
Yeah, some accountability. Yeah. Like with my fight, there was. I remember the first night of sparring was the kickoff of NFL season, and I remember going out of my driveway, and my neighbor had his TV on, and like Thursday night football, the game was on. Like I'm driving to spar, and he's sitting out there with a ice cold beer watching football, and I'm like, I should just like go hang out with him. Like, why am I going there? And I'm like, no, because I told people I'm doing this. Like I made it public. I'm like, hey, Mike Ruman is going to get in a ring and fight some guy, and I'm going to go do this thing. And so I think just it's probably that like public shaming, like shaming isn't bad sometimes, or you can use it as an asset to your life. But finding guys that will hold you accountable. And there were nights where it's like, we live in the foothills, and I used to drive a 2004 Honda Odyssey. And there were times where I couldn't get out of my like driveway. My trainer would call me. He's like, Mike, where are you? I'm like, Eric, I can't make it out of my neighborhood. He's like, if you don't get to training, like you can't fight. And so there was, that accountability of like, if I don't go, I can't do this thing. And so, just making sure, surround yourself with people who can hold you accountable to like getting it done.
Man, that's good. See, at the end of the day, no man's an island. Like we get to our successes because somebody pushed us. Someone like had a football coach who just believed in something we didn't see. That's a powerful thing. Yeah, it's really good. Especially, I think, what's interesting about training and fitness in general is for thousands of years, people trained in groups, whether it's related to fighting or anything. And it had only been the last 50 years we had these gyms and fitness centers where it's, training is this individual thing. But really for centuries, people ran together, people hunted together, people lifted things together. And so that is really good. Well, Mike, we're kind of coming on time, but is there anything, specific you really would love my audience to know about you and what you do, healthydads.com, anything like that? So,
I think my biggest, especially with your audience, is just realizing that nobody has this thing figured out.
Yeah, there you go.
We're all fumbling forward, hopefully, like learning together. I learned from my biggest fails. Like I jumped my corporate job 7 years ago to start a startup. It didn't make it, but like that morphed into something different, which morphed into, two companies. And then, Healthy Dads came out of those two, but nobody has this thing figured out, but finding people to do life together. And that's what I'm trying to build with this healthydads.com community, is just guys doing life together who are trying to figure it out. And really, I think my biggest thing I want to leave your audience is, when you're sparring, there's this idea of +1, 0, -1. And the goal is find somebody better than you to spar with. That's the +1. Find someone who's at your level. That's the 0. And then find someone just a little bit below you, the -1, because all those people can learn from each other. And so if you're on this journey, you're 25 and you're like, man, I'd love to eventually start my own business. Like, yes, talk to the retired guy who started a business, but also talk to the 30-year-old who's in year 2, because they've just been through it, and we can learn from them. And then that 25-year-old, like find a 21-year-old who's maybe in the same spot they were. And so, I love that +1, 0, -1, just in all aspects of life, discipleship, parenting, career, sports. I try to apply that and just have people that mentor you, coaches that pour into you, but also a community of guys that you can do life with, and then also people that you can pour into.
Man, that's good. Well, Mike, I appreciate you coming on. This has been a lot of fun, great conversation. Yeah. So anyway, y'all check out Mike Ruman at healthydads.com. That's all we've got for this episode of the Men Are Forged podcast. One thing that would really help me and other potential listeners is to rate this show and leave a comment on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Make sure to link up with me at menareforged.com. Follow me on any social media, Facebook, Instagram, or even LinkedIn, as well as check out healthydads.com. That's healthydads.com. Thank you all for listening.